Hi, this is Luke from Health and High Performance. This video is for any runner wishing to reduce their risk of injury. In this video we're going to cover our 5 tips for injury-free running. So a little bit about myself. I've been in private practice since 2004. I've done some further postgraduate study, including a postgraduate diploma of sports chiropractic and also a master in sports science. I was recently awarded a fellow of sports and exercise chiropractor. I'm a keen runner myself and have completed multiple marathons and Ironman triathlons. I'm the current president of Sports Chiropractic Australia, and you can find me on the socials at SportsChiroLuke. I'm fortunate enough to work out of a fantastic facility at Health and High Performance, where we have our own gym there. We've got access to state-of-the-art technology with our Axit system, including force plates, and also able to do on-site running gait analysis with our treadmill. Unfortunately, injuries in running are very common, with the research revealing at least 50% of runners will be injured at a particular point in time. 80% of these injuries are overload injuries. Why overload and not overuse? Overuse implies that a body part is being used more than another. For example, is the left knee really being used more than any other body part? Acute running injuries are rare, consisting mainly of muscle injuries or blisters and abrasions. 80% of running injuries are overuse, and 75% of these occur below the knee, with the most common injury site being at the knee, followed by the feet, ankles, lower leg and shin, and then with some scattered around the back, hip, pelvis and groin. Earning the name runner's knee, the most common running injury is patellofemoral pain and represents almost half of all running injuries, with females being more prone. Other common injuries include bone stress injuries such as medial tibial stress syndrome and tibial stress fracture, and tendon injuries including plantar heel pain and Achilles tendinopathy. What causes a running injury? Firstly, we should preface by saying that running injuries are complex, with each injury having different triggering factors which can include genetics, your structure, mechanics, training loads, psychosocial and tissue qualities. Basically, any injury occurs when the demands on the body exceeds its ability to handle these demands. We like to use a seesaw analogy. On one side you have load, which includes training load, intensity, how good your recovery is, sleep, nutrition and life stresses. And on the other side we have the load capacity of your body, which includes how strong you are, your mobility, biomechanics, running gait, previous injury and genetics. So whilst there may be many different contributors to running injuries, here are our top 5 to prevent running injuries. Our first tip to injury-free running is appropriate training loads. The main mistakes we see runners make with training loads is number 1, doing too much running too soon and creating loading peaks, and number 2, too much of their weekly mileage is at a high intensity. In this graph on the left here, we see a typical graph of an injured runner. Rapid increases in weekly running volume and a lack of consistency. Some weeks running a lot and some weeks running very little, with these peaks and troughs. The graph on the right is what runners should aspire to, gradual increases in weekly running mileage. Some of you may have heard of the 10% rule, that is gradually increasing your weekly running mileage by 10% each week. Is there any research to support this? Well, a 2014 study by Nielsen found that novice runners increasing their running distance by more than 30% over a 2-week period seem to be more vulnerable to distance-related injuries than runners increasing their running distance by less than 10%. So the takeaway from this research is that usually increasing mileage by between 10 and 30% is desirable. So which is it? Should you increase by 10 or 30%? Well, we like to use this little table here, and if you're beginning to run and you're running less than 10 kilometers per week, if you were to increase by 10%, it would take you an unnecessarily long time to build up your mileage. For example, 10% of 5 kilometers is only 500 meters per week. So in this case, increasing by 30% is acceptable. On the other end of the scale, for those doing higher weekly mileage, more than sort of 20 kilometres, increasing by 30% would be too high an increase. For example, 30% of 30 kilometres is a whopping 9 kilometres per week. So therefore, sticking to 10% increase is more appropriate for these. Now, we all like to feel like we've got a good workout after our runs, but this doesn't mean that you should be running every run hard. The problem with doing most or all of your running hard is that it's quite taxing on your body and can make you more prone to injury. In the early 2000s, an American scientist, Stephen Seiler, studied how elite endurance athletes really train. He found a remarkably consistent pattern. World-class cyclists, Nordic skiers, rowers, runners, swimmers and triathletes all did approximately 80% of their training at low intensity and 20% at high intensity. Following on from this, Seiler then performed additional studies that compared the 80-20 approach to 65-35 and 50-50 and discovered that the 80-20 balance came out on top in terms of performance gains. So you should be running 80% of your weekly mileage at an easy pace with only 20% for hard efforts. We often see this flipped around in many amateur runners. What is an easy pace? Well, an easy way to determine what your easy pace is, it's the fastest pace you can do whilst being able to breathe completely through your nose. Our second tip to injury-free running is running technique. Running is a skill, and just like many other skills, such as swinging a golf club or swimming, there are better ways to do things. Now, we should preface by saying that there is no single best way to run, but there are a lot of better ways to run. Certain characteristics of running technique have been shown in the research to be related to running economy and also injury. With the running gait assessment, analysis can be performed of many characteristics, including things like posture, foot landing and overstride, cadence and arm swing. One of the first things we assess with running technique is posture. Common faults we see here are bending forwards too much, as seen in the middle image, and the pelvis dropping excessively, as seen in the image on the right. A cue we often use to correct excessive forward bending is to imagine there is a string attached to your head and lifting you up tall. The next common fault we see with running technique is overstriding. Overstriding has been shown to increase braking forces, which results in greater stress on your body. So keep your running strides nice and short and resist the temptation to want to stride out in front of you. Another common running technique fault seen in runners is arm swing issues. Here on the left we see a common fault with the arms crossing over the midline. Ideally we want the arms to go slightly inwards when swinging, but they should never cross over the midline. Our third tip to injury-free running is strength training. Why is strength training beneficial for runners? Firstly, for its role in injury prevention, and secondly, to improve performance. And who doesn't want either of those? We have a saying that you shouldn't run to be fit, you should be fit to run. That is, if you lack some of the required strength and mobility for running, you may be at a higher risk of injury. Our three favourite self-tests that you can use at home are number 1, the single leg calf raise to fatigue, number 2, single leg sit to stand, and number 3, single leg bridge to fatigue. When it comes to running, the most important muscles are not the glutes, as some people may have told you, it's the calves. So appropriately, the first test to perform at home is the calf raise to fatigue test. This test involves doing as many calf raises as possible until you can't do any more. Check out the video for tips on how to perform this test, and the strength normals can also be seen on this slide. The next assessment is the sit to stand test, and this one focuses on the quads. Check out the video here on how to perform this test. The aim is to do more than 25 reps with less than 10% difference from side to side. And the third test to do at home is the single leg bridge test. Again, the aim is to perform 25 reps on each side with less than 10% difference between legs. One of the excuses runners give for not doing strength training is that they are concerned it will bulk them up. This myth has been dispelled with recent research by Beattie and Blagrove showing that not only an improvement in strength, running and economy and VO2 max, but able to do this without increasing bulk. Some tips on implementing strength training into your program are: don't just perform weighted running. Firstly, the exercise you perform doesn't need to resemble the movements of running, and secondly, you don't need to be doing the reps that you'd be doing on a run. The aim of strength training is to build strength. Your endurance will come from running. Ideally, you want to fit 2 to 3 strength training sessions in per week in your off season, and decreasing this to once per week when competing or approaching a race. And to achieve optimal results, you should strength train for at least 6 weeks. How to schedule your strength training sessions. Ideally, you want to separate your running and weight sessions by 8 hours and put your weights on the same day as your harder runs. This leaves your easy days as exactly that. Remember that running is your priority, so ensure that your legs are refreshed and ready to go on your harder running days. Here we give an example of what a week might look like incorporating your running and resistance training. As you can see, on a Tuesday, our harder sessions with our speed work followed by weights, and then again on our Thursday with a harder session with the tempo runs, and then our weights in the afternoon, ensuring that we have an 8-hour separation between the two. What type of exercises should you perform? Well, you want to be targeting the main muscle groups involved in running, so the calves, quads, hips and hamstrings. So some examples of exercises include weighted calf raises, both with knees bent and straight, squats, and my favourite variation, the rear leg elevated split squat, lunges, hip thrusters, and weighted bridges and deadlifts. As we mentioned previously, you want to be building strength, so keep the rep ranges below 12 reps. Our next tip for injury-free running is sleep and recovery. Sleep deprivation is very common in the general population, with 40% of Australians sleeping less than 7 hours, with a total estimated cost to Australians a whopping $66.3 billion in 2016-17. For runners, sleep is paramount when considering the training response, which requires a balance between stress, fatigue and recovery. Therefore, runners should look to promote recovery, which would then decrease their stress and fatigue state. Sleep is surprisingly overlooked by athletes themselves as a cause of fatigue. Poor sleep quantity and or poor quality appears to exist in many athletic populations, which can be due to a combination of scheduling of training sessions, such as getting up early in the morning in competition, travel fatigue, and impaired sleep onset due to increased arousal post-competition. Sleep can have a profound effect on injury risk. Mileski's et al. Study on adolescent athletes found that those who slept on average less than 8 hours per night had a 1.7 times greater risk of being injured than those who slept more than 8 hours. In another study on elite adolescent athletes, Van Rosen et al. Found that sleeping more than 8 hours per night reduced the injury risk by 61%. A large range of metabolic and immunologic processes are negatively affected by poor sleep. Reduced sleep quantity was associated with an increased incidence of illness within the next 7 days in competitive male AFL players. Those who slept less than 5 hours are 4.5 times more likely to suffer a cold versus those who slept 7 hours plus. Reductions in motor and cognitive performance, reaction times, and mood, state, and emotional stability are often observed in sleep-deprived athletes. Poor sleep quality, particularly during high training loads and competition periods, has been identified as a marker of under-recovery and an early sign of overreaching. Brandt et al.'s study on Brazilian athletes revealed a relationship between poor sleep quality and lost matches during a competition. Silver et al. Found a correlation between sleep duration and competition performance in elite gymnasts. Napping can be used to help improve running performance in those endurance athletes that have had less than 7 hours sleep. So how much sleep do we need? Well, the National Sleep Foundation's recommendations for young adults and adults is between 7 to 9 hours per night. Most elite athletes know the performance-enhancing benefits of sleep, and this graph here demonstrates some of the sleep habits of the world's best. Of note, Roger Federer averaging 11 to 12 hours per night, LeBron James 12 hours, and Usain Bolt between 8 and 10 hours a night. So you really need to be aiming for 7 to 8 hours of sleep and increasing this during harder training blocks. So how do you improve this? Well, firstly, routine. Try and keep the same sleep-wake time. When it comes to sleep, our brains like consistency. Try and go to bed and wake at similar times throughout the week. What about sleep-ins? Well, unfortunately, having a longer sleep on the weekend can throw out your body's normal routine. So try and keep some consistency on the weekend as well. Try having a shower before bedtime. This can help you sleep by elevating and then lowering your core body temperature, which prepares your body for sleep. Ditch the electronic distractions. Avoid the use of electronic devices for at least 1 hour before bedtime. These produce blue light, which has been shown to inhibit secretion of melatonin. To help reduce blue light exposure on your mobile device, the latest iPhone has a night shift function under Settings, Display and Brightness. For your laptop and desktop computers, you can use a free program called Flux, which calculates sunrise and sunset and automatically adjusts your screen brightness. The other alternative is blue light blocking sunglasses. A recent study on adolescents found that frequent use of technology at bedtime was associated with 15 to 60 minutes less sleep per night, greater difficulty in switching off at bedtime, and frequent users of social media at bedtime averaged an hour less sleep per night. Try and avoid any mentally demanding tasks in the lead up to bedtime. Reading a book is a good way to wind down. Avoid stimulants. Might be pretty obvious, but caffeine is a stimulant, and in one study, consuming caffeine 6 hours before bedtime was shown to reduce total sleep time by 1 hour. Also avoid alcohol after 5 o'clock. Whilst alcohol can help you get to sleep, it actually impairs restorative sleep, hence why you often feel tired the following day after a few too many drinks. Your bedroom environment, have it cool. Having a room that is too hot or cold will affect your ability to sleep. It has been found that around 16 to 18 degrees Celsius is the ideal room temperature. It also depends on what sort of covering you're using on the bed. Have the room dark. Try and remove or cover any light in your room. Darkness triggers the brain to slow down and stimulates the production of melatonin. No watching TVs or using laptops or eating in bed. Keep the bedroom for sleep. Scheduling of training. Athletes often report worse and disturbed sleep the night before an early morning training session. Try not to sacrifice sleep in order to train. If you need to train early, ensure that you get to bed early and try and keep the same sleep-wake times throughout the week, as mentioned previously. A 2014 study on swimmers found that on training days, swimmers averaged almost 2 hours less sleep per night. Napping is great, and sleeping during the day for short bursts under 40 minutes can help your body catch up on missed sleep. Ensure, however, that you don't nap after 5 o'clock, as it can impair your ability to sleep at night. In a recent study, endurance runners who slept less than 7 hours per night and took an afternoon nap showed an improved running performance. Try a nappuccino. If you tend to feel groggy after a nap, try having a coffee just before you nap. Then when you wake, the caffeine will kick in and help reduce sleepiness. Supplementation. There are many supplements which can assist with sleep, including magnesium, 5-HTP, melatonin, theanine, GABA, tryptophan. It's important to speak to a health practitioner before taking any of these to find out if suitable for you. For further reading on sleep, please head to our 2 blogs written on this topic. The 5th and final tip for runners to avoid injuries is listening to your body. Most running injuries have warning signs that are often ignored. What are abnormal and normal pains? As runners, we all have niggles every now and then. Things that may indicate needing some assistance include pain that gets worse on running, consistent pain in an area for longer than a week, and pain when resting or at night. Whilst it's usually okay to continue to run during recovery of most running injuries, it's important to get a diagnosis and plan to ensure that you're on the right track and not continuing to aggravate your conditions. You may not have to stop running. With an accurate diagnosis and plan, you may not need to stop doing what you love. With most running injuries, you can usually continue running with a safe level of pain whilst correcting the things that contributed to it in the first place. For further reading on this topic, you can head to our blog, Can You Exercise with Pain? Lastly, some of you may be thinking, what about other things like shoes, stretching, or running surfaces? Don't they reduce injury? Well, whilst they can make a difference for some people, these are the 1%ers, and the research has supported this. The 5 keys that we covered in this presentation are what you should focus on getting right to reduce your chances of injury. So in summary, what should you do to reduce your risk of sustaining a running injury? Number 1, ensure correct training loads. Number 2, good running technique. Number 3, strength train. Number 4, get enough sleep. And number 5, listen to your body. So we hope you found today's presentation useful. If you need any further help or assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out to us either via email, luke@healthhp.com.au, via our socials at Health High Performance or at SportsChiroLuke, our Facebook or our YouTube sites. Happy running!